Okay, thanks everybody. This is Greg Smith at the River Forecast Center, and welcome to our February water supply webinar. Today we're going to go through the January weather conditions that we went through, the current conditions that are driving the forecasts. Then we'll do a little briefing on the February 1st water supply forecast, kind of the big picture look of it, the future weather. And then, as we've been doing on a lot of these webinars, we've had 4 or 5 slides just discussing some kind of process that's water supply related um, that's going on in our office. Dust on snow has been an issue that's gets a lot of talk, gets a lot of discussion at the meetings, and we're going to follow up on that on what we've kind of been doing at this office to address that and how we can try and incorporate that information into our forecasts. And then to finish up, we'll do have a little discussion, just a couple slides to talk about minor changes on our web page. At least I hope they're minor for everybody, but I think it's going to allow you to maybe get a little better information out of our web page. This presentation will also be available on our website once we're finished here, and that address is below on this slide on our site. Wow, it's really slow. So let's start with the January weather. And there's not a lot of exciting things to talk about in January. Anybody who lives in this area knows how warm and dry it really was. It was more like a spring month. We had a ridge of high pressure over the west that really dominated the weather pattern. At times it would move, towards the coast or a little further inland, and it got smashed down a little bit by a couple storms that moved through, but we really didn't get a lot of precipitation over the upper Colorado River drainage during the month. I've got a couple of different satellite images here that you can kind of see how clear it is over the area. The first one's on January 7th, and then the second week of January. As we did progress through the month, again, I mentioned the ridge did kind of flatten down a little bit, and that's going to show up on these next slides momentarily. And we did have a couple of storms that moved through our southern part of our area. The storms would come in, they'd hit the ridge, they would kind of split, and then they would develop over the south. On the last week of the month, we had some decent rain in the Gila River Basin of Arizona. Some of the tropical moisture kind of got pulled into that one, so we actually did see some good runoff in that area, and that actually affect the forecast here for the rest of the period, and you'll see that momentarily. Next map. Coming up, the next slide is the January and the seasonal precipitation. And over the northern half of the area, it was really quite dry. As you can see, much below average conditions, extended from the northern part of the Great Basin through the Green River Basin, all the way down into the San Juan River Basin, and then areas that did receive near or above average precipitation really are not in the or were not in the water supply producing areas, I guess. With the exception of the rainfall that does fall in the lower Colorado region, so in the Gila River Basin and parts of the Little Colorado River Basin. But when it comes to feeding into the Colorado, we really didn't do very well. Seasonal precipitation near or below average over a large part of the area now. The only areas that are kind of holding on to anything near average are parts of the upper Green, a little part of the upper Colorado River, especially areas up near the Blue River and the headwater locations, and eastern part of the Gunnison River Basin. So conditions have continued to dry out. As far as the temperatures, it was very warm during the month. We had several daily temperature records established at sites throughout the west, throughout our region. These were both daily high temperatures and high minimum temperatures. And you can see on the graph here, we have the temperature deviations for both the maximum on the left, the minimum on the right, several degrees above average over most of the area, with the exception of the southern part of Arizona, as they did get a little bit of storminess there. So that tended to also provide us with storms that saw rainfall in places where snow would typically occur. We did see a little bit of lower elevation melt. We did notice some enhanced base flows in some areas. But I think a lot of that was due to rain falling instead of snow, which is usually what is occurring during the month of January. This is a shot at the snow conditions, and this is looking at January 6th of this year on the left and February 3rd on the right. And everywhere pretty much either kind of flatlined or went up slowly. Nothing really, I didn't really see any sites that showed melt, but the areas that did kind of hold on to some of the snow as far as, I guess, being near average, near slightly above average, it's kind of limited to the upper Green River Basin up above Fontenelle. Again, parts of the upper Colorado River headwaters, again, that Blue River area kind of stands out. And a little bit of the eastern Gunnison River Basin, as well as south central Utah, some of those tributaries that flow into the Colorado River and the Green River. Those areas are still looking okay, but a lot of areas actually dropped off as far as their percent of average or their percent of median snow, which is what's displayed here. Especially in the Great Basin and the Duchesne River Basin, we started to kind of fall behind where we should be at this time of year. Really no improvement in the San Juan and in the lower Colorado River. A lot of those areas, especially in the Salton Verde, are actually out of snow at this time. I've got a snapshot of just a few snow tells here I threw up that's going to show up on this next slide momentarily. I just picked 4 basins at random and grabbed a few sites to kind of look at. And what you'll see in the green is this year's snow accumulation compared to last year's, which is the red line. And in most places, really not doing any better. A little better in the upper Green right now, but if you recall last February, we really got clobbered with a lot of moisture. So that's most likely going to cross here in the next week or so. But the upper Green is one of those areas that, at least at New Fork Lake here, is showing a little bit above the average and the median. Everything else is worse than last year, and this is kind of common in a lot of the areas of our forecast area. Next slide is what our model sees as far as the snow. So this is a modeled snow water equivalent, and this is what's driving the forecast that you see on our webpage, the evolution plots. And what you're going to see here on the left-hand side is the snow for the 6th of January. And I'm kind of waiting for this. There we go. For the 6th of January in the model, and then the snow on the 4th of February. And you can, what you should notice here is just kind of an increase in the yellows and oranges and reds. That's where we are quite a bit below average, the calibration average for the snow model that is driving our forecast. We did see some decrease in those areas that are still a little bit above average, but not dramatically. The upper Colorado River headwaters did also show a little bit of a decrease, but things are not horrible up there. We still are near average or slightly below. But unfortunately, not looking good in the San Juan. A lot of the Great Basin has gotten worse, and the Duchesne River Basin has gotten worse. Next up is a map or an image that had some favorable reviews last time, so I thought we'd show it again. It's the soil moisture going into the winter, which was back in November, with the latest snow out of our model. And kind of what I'm looking for here, what I want to highlight are those areas where the signals kind of match up, where maybe you have near or above average soil moisture going into the winter and a near or above average snow. And those areas haven't changed, but I think the effect is the relationship's a little bit maybe not as strong, especially in the upper Colorado headwaters, which is that third arrow down. You can see on the right the snow model. It's definitely closer to average, or maybe even a little bit below in some of those areas. But the soil moisture going in was good, so hopefully that's going to make up where the snow hasn't fallen off as much. But when you look at the Great Basin, you have dry soil moisture conditions over much of the basin, except with the exception of the headwater areas. in the Weber and then the Bear and in parts of the Provo. Um, but the snow in the model has really dropped off. And San Juan River Basin, it's not good in both counts. You still have the soil moisture going into the winter wasn't good, but the snow situation continues to get worse. And there's a point here where just that low snow, it's going to not matter what the soil is. The low snow is just gonna kind of dominate some of these bleaker forecasts. Not really going to address the lower Colorado River Basin because that changes throughout the winter and due to recent storms. So that's um, not as it's just not a constant where the soil moisture underneath the snowpack really doesn't change throughout much of the winter until we start getting the melt. So next up, let's take a look at kind of a summary of the water supply forecasts that were issued in February. And the map shows basically in the green and the blues, those are the near to above to much above average. And you see we really don't have any of the blues left anymore, or maybe just a little bit of the light blues, especially over towards some of the upper Colorado River headwaters and the upper green. So a lot of areas in that 85 to 100% of average range still, but there's also a lot more areas that have fallen into the lower categories, indicated by the yellows, the reds, and the orange. And so this map has changed a little bit, and the next graphic I'll show you shows a little bit better just how things have changed from the last month. But if you look around at some of the actual forecast numbers that are here, everything's below average. Flaming Gorge has now fallen below average. Parts of the Gunnison, further below average. And it just definitely gets worse as you move further south. Some of the Great Basin, even the headwater points, have now fallen to below average as well. So that's kind of what we're looking at as we head into the month of February. So my next plot that I mentioned, and for some reason these are taking a little bit longer to come up this time, I'm not really sure why, is the February 1st water supply forecast. And what we have here on this one, it just shows it's going to show a percent of average change, and that's what's going to be on the map. Here it comes. And this is from the January 1st. And all those reds are pretty much means that there's been a decrease of at least 10% of average. The percent of average has dropped 10% or more. And that's dramatic when you look at this large area, all these forecasts going down. The only place that went up was a little adjustment in the severe, but these are pretty minor numbers. And maybe a little less drop over in the virgin. But overall, I mean, things really took a nosedive. In each of the boxes there, the values are the volumes in thousands of acre feet of the decrease from the January 1st forecast to the February 1st forecast. So for Lake Powell, it was a 1.3 million acre feet drop, about a 500,000 acre feet at Flaming Gorge, and Onso. McPhee Reservoir, 45,000 acre foot drop, and Navajo, 50,000. So some pretty significant drops from January 1st to February 1st. The February 1st water supply forecasts that are in the lower Colorado River drainage, there's just a few sites that we forecast in this area. They are now going to be for the February through May period, and they will be expressed as a percent of median, and that image should be coming up here shortly. The the Gila River Basin actually showed a little bit of improvement because of rainfall that occurred, especially the last month of January. We actually had, I think, worked some extra hours because we had some high runoff in some of the streams. So the soil moisture conditions in the Gila have actually improved. So the next event that comes through should be basically a more efficient runoff event, and we do see some precipitation on the horizon potentially for the lower Colorado River Basin. But not as dramatic. It really didn't affect the Virgin and the Salt River and the Little Colorado River as much, and those areas are still looking at below median February through May volumes. I am going to throw up here an forecast evolution plot for Lake Powell, and it just basically shows how our model, our ensemble streamflow prediction model, which is run daily, how it's trended down throughout the month of January as the dry conditions persisted upstream. And you can see kind of where the official forecasts are in the red. This is really common for a lot of the points. You can get on the web page, and I'll remind you at the end of this how to find all these for various sites you might want to look at. But you can see where the forecast trend has dropped, and our forecasts have pretty much followed the model pretty good, pretty consistently throughout the season so far. So before I get into talking about the future weather, I'm going to unmute this for a minute just to see if there's any questions so far.
The conference is now in talk mode.
Okay, does anyone have any questions before we go on to the future weather? Okay, I'll take that as a no, and I'm going to, again, we'll allow for an opportunity for questions again.
The conference is now in silent mode.
Let's see. Okay, no type questions. Okay, next let's take a look at the future weather coming up as we enter February. We have another atmospheric river like we did last February, but this one I don't think is going to be as beneficial to us. It's showing, this is a water vapor satellite imagery from yesterday. There's a long fetch of moisture that really feeds all the way back towards Hawaii, and it's going to bring in quite a bit of precipitation to the west coast, especially the northern part of California and areas north, over the next 2 to 3 days. But with the ridge building over us, it's really unlikely we'll see a really dramatic impact from this. We may end up with some, it's possible it might affect parts of the extreme northern Bear and parts of the upper Green River Basin. And maybe as some of it rounds the ridge, we might see some in maybe the Yampa. But at this point, indications are that it's not going to be really significant for us. I have some medium range weather forecast model images that are coming up that kind of show what's going to happen here. And momentarily they will show up for me. But basically we have a ridge of high pressure that's going to build into the first part of this weekend. So as this moisture is moving in, the ridge is building up, and you can kind of see it on this image. The precipitation from the model anyway is indicated in the shaded colors and the legends at the base there. But the whole idea is here you can see over our area where the river forecast center boundary is in the yellow, that we have a kind of ridging, and that's kind of shown by those green lines, the arc over us right there. And that really isn't suggestive that we're going to see a lot of precipitation over most of our area. As we move through the weekend and into early part of next week, the ridge does look like it will flatten in response to some storm systems that are moving into the area. However, they are splitting, which means they will be weaker. A lot of the precipitation may be fairly narrow banded along the cold front as it moves through. This image is for the 10th of the month, so early next week, showing kind of a band of precipitation that starts to move into the area. But again, it should be weakening as it goes through. So some precipitation, though, is likely kind of in that Monday, I would say the Monday through Wednesday time period. Beyond that, we get into kind of the extended part of the model, and the confidence tends to drop, although both the primary models we look at are suggesting similarly that the ridge will rebound, although we will have kind of a low pressure system that's further to the south of us, and that's where we were thinking that maybe we'll get some more precipitation into Arizona and the lower Colorado River drainage. That systems like this can easily bring up a little bit of tropical moisture, but it's kind of far out there, so that moisture might just as easily end up east of that area into Texas, as compared to end up in Arizona. So that's still a little bit far out, but it's something, I guess, to keep an eye on. But it does look like we'll get back into a high pressure ridge here by the middle of, or by the late part of next week. The precipitation forecast from the Weather Prediction Center does show precipitation over a lot of our area, but I think it's going to be, in many cases, light. It just depends on how much of that moisture that is moving into the west coast now may get caught up in the flow and move through our area. And here's the image that shows the precipitation forecast from the WPC. And, amounts are on the light side, but still maybe some potential for the Upper Green, Northern Bear, and along the Colorado Ridgeline, Rockies Ridgeline. But I'm not real optimistic that we're going to see a significant precip event at this time. As far as getting into the longer range, we're still kind of looking at the El Nino possibility and the Climate Prediction Center discussion, which I pulled this slide from, and it doesn't look like this has really been updated lately, but it was on their latest discussion from earlier this week. It still indicates in that January, February, March period, you can see the vertical columns there. In the red is the possibility of El Nino, and in their discussion, they're still going with a 50 to 60% chance of a weak El Nino during the February through March period, and an increasing chance of neutral conditions beyond that through the summer, maybe even into the early fall. So if we do see an El Nino, it looks weak at best, and it's kind of becoming one of these situations where they'll be talking about it in past tense, or I think in another month or so. As far as the Climate Prediction Center forecast, the 98-day outlooks show a above average or an increasing chance for above average precipitation over actually much of the forecast area, but especially over the southwest, over Arizona, New Mexico, parts of the San Juan. And sorry, this is taking a while to come up again. This is like old days. And then we have, you'll see on the temperature graphic, that really hasn't changed much. It's going to show, there we go, it's going to show a increased chances for warmer than average temperatures. And, that's pretty obvious when you look at the short-term weather, that that's not going to be really hard to achieve over a good part of the area, especially the Great Basin and Upper Green. So briefly, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about this dust on snow issue. And again, this is just our attempt to throw, I guess, a little twist into these webinars to show what we're working on that's kind of water supply related. This is really abbreviated, and if there's an interest in a more technical, more drawn out webinar or discussion, we're more than willing to do that. But basically, we do have dust on snow. We have data that we gather from JPL, the Jet Propulsion Lab, that's basically, it's a dust contamination, ends up being a dust contamination grid for us. And we go ahead and determine daily snow melt and mean aerial dust for, we have this historically, so we go ahead and determine this historically. We've developed a method to incorporate this into our model, and my whole goal here is to kind of show you just a couple quick images of the results of doing that. We know solar radiation, of course, drives the snow melt, so we're expecting that in a heavily forested area that the snowpack, the dust effect would be less than in an open area. So this brings tree line into consideration. Temperature drives the snowmelt in our model, and therefore we make adjustments to our temperatures in the model. So in this case, we made them historically, and you'll be able to see how this looks momentarily. And so I'll show you some initial results here, and then we'll talk a little bit about well, I'll just briefly kind of point out what our plan is for the spring. We're going to look at just two basins here, just two images from our calibration program, and we'll be talking about the Uncompahgre River near Ridgway and the Elk at Milner. And as my slides begin to change here, the Uncompahgre River near Ridgway, this area, we kind of would expect a significant effect from dust in this area. Simply because a lot of it, the area above 11,000 feet is open. About 80% of the area, 52 square miles, is open, and that's also the majority of the area in the Uncompahgre near Ridgway forecast segment. The lower elevations, definitely, it's about 50-50, but a lot of that is forested or not open. Elk at Milner, however, is very evergreen. The majority of the area, our forecast segment is below 10,000 feet, and it's in forested area. So we would expect that the dust would not have as much effect in this area. So what I'm going to show you next are basically going back to our calibration model, and we're going to be looking at 2009, and I'm going to show you what our model simulates or simulated, and then what the actual observed was. And what you can see is in the purple is what the model simulated. And we're looking at the upper part of the slide right now, the top part. And that's the period, that's pretty much the April through July runoff period that you can see there where we have all the runoff occurring. And in the white is what was observed. So you can see we really under observed or under simulated the first part of the melt in the I think that's probably the May period. And then and ignore the other colors because we're just looking at the purple and the white. After we made this temperature adjustment during this period, you can see that the simulation was much better. And the purple was much closer to the white line on the early part of the season. So that kind of showed one effect of us making this adjustment based on these dust grids. The other one I wanted to show is Elk Milner, where we have a lot of, again, it's a lot of forested area. And in this case, kind of under-simulated some of that same period. Again, this was another high dust year. And the purple at the first part of the runoff, the simulation was below the observed. But after making the adjustment, we really didn't see any improvement. And so in this case, our conclusion, at least, and this is, again, fairly simplified explanation, is that it didn't have as much effect due to the forest in this area. So this procedure and the dust cover itself just didn't seem to have as much effect. So it really depends on where the dust is and if it's in an exposed area versus in above the tree line versus whether it's in a forested area. So our results kind of show that. What we have shown is definitely it improves the timing of the melt in our model, but we haven't seen a really dramatic change or effect to the seasonal volumes. There may be some effect to the volumes. We still need a little more work to do, but qualitatively, we would think that maybe there's a plus or minus 5% volume effect, depending on whether you have dust that's exposed very early in the season or very late in the season. For instance, late in the seasons where we tend to have really high melt rates anyway, it may really accelerate them, and perhaps we even get a little more yield. But that's some additional work we need to do. But our plan is to be able to implement this kind of approach this spring into our model and take a look. So as we get into, if we get into another really high dust year as the year moves on, we at least plan to have a process in place for our model to handle it this spring. And again, this is very brief, but I think we can get into more details at another time with a more detailed technical webinar if you would like. Finally, just a couple, I got 3 or 4 more slides, and I just want to go over our web page changes. I know we promised not to make web page changes during water supply, but we were kind of forced into it a little bit as we had to change our map backgrounds. We're now using an Esri map background, and at that point we thought it might be beneficial to update our legend options. So when you pull up our web page, what you'll see is what's there right now, and then in order to look at snow conditions, in addition to being able to click them at the top, on the right side you can click any of these legends and get a little more information on what you want to display. And this is also going to allow you to display various types of information at once. You can display precipitation, snow tell points, snow grids from the model. As folks get into using it a little bit, they will hopefully find that it's useful. And there may be a couple bugs in there since we just moved to this, so if you notice anything, please let us know. We're working a couple known ones out right now. When you look at snow, there's the option to look at it at points, as what's displayed here is what you're used to doing. But you can also select the grid option, and this is where you can look at exactly what our model is showing. And that's what I've got displayed on here now are the actual snow tell sites along with the gridded snow water equivalent from our model. And you can combine this information and look at it. There were some requests to have this available after the last webinar, so we're trying to address some of those as well. Water supply, when you click on the water supply option at the top or in the legend, this is what you're going to get. Pretty much everything you've seen. You can then select if you want to look at the official one or if you want to look at the ESP, which is the model one. And if you click on any individual point, you will bring up the actual evolution plot. So that part really hasn't changed. If the evolution plot is a little bit off the edge of the page, just go ahead and click on it and it'll bring it up in a new window. So that's another little issue that we're working with. So that's pretty much what I have for the webinar. I'm going to unmute this now.
The conference is now in talk mode.
And ask if there are any questions.
Dave Cantor.
Hello, Dave.
How's it going? Thank you very much for